Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It looks like those are all the appearances. Thanks to counsel and attorneys. This matter concerns the question whether, to the extent that it allows individuals to be elected to the National Assembly and provincial legislatures only through membership of political parties, the Electoral Act 73 of 1998 is constitutional. An argument advanced by all four applicants, New Nation Movement, NPC, Ms. Chantal Don Revel, GRO, and Indigenous First Nation Advocacy SA, was that the Electoral Act is unconstitutional for unjustifiably limiting the right to stand for public office and, if elected, to hold office as conferred by Section 19(3)(b) of the Constitution. In addition, some applicants submitted that the Electoral Act infringes their right to freedom of association protected by Section 18 of the Constitution. The High Court dismissed the application. The participating respondents, the Minister of Home Affairs, the Electoral Commission, and the Speaker of the National Assembly countered that, at best for the applicants, Section 19(3)(b) is neutral. It does not require that membership of the National Assembly and provincial legislatures must include independence. They argued that, on the contrary, other provisions of the Constitution, like Sections 1D, 46(1)(a), 105(1)(a), 57(2), 178(1)(h), and 236, point away from the interpretation contended for by the applicants. Relying only on Sections 1D, 46(1)(a), and 105(1)(a) of the Constitution, the High Court accepted the respondents' argument and dismissed the application. The applicants appealed to this court. CASAC and OUTA are participating as amici curiae in this court. The first judgment penned by me and concurred in by Cameron J., Jafta J., Gampepe J., Nhlanhla J., Matopo AJ, Theron J., and Victor AJ holds that Section 19(3)(b) is part of closely related rights that the Constitution deliberately groups together as, quote, political rights, close quote. They are so interconnected that they have to be read together. Section 19(1) affords every citizen the right to freedom to make political choices. A textual analysis indicates that the list of political choices in Section 19(1) is not exhaustive. Thus, a conscious choice not to form or join a political party is as much a political choice as is the choice to form or join a political party. And it must equally be deserving of constitutional protection. Once an adult citizen is forced to exercise the Section 19(3)(b) right, that is to stand for public office through a political party, that divests her or him of the very choice guaranteed by Section 19(1) not to form or join a political party. That cannot be. We must strive for a reading that does not truncate the full effect of any of the rights afforded by Section 19. The respondent's reading of Section 19.3b results in a diminution of the political choices afforded by Section 19.1. Effectively, that gives rise to a conflict between the two subsections. Our jurisprudence requires that provisions of the Constitution must be read harmoniously. Coming to the applicant's challenge founded on the right to freedom of association guaranteed in Section 18 of the Constitution, I take the view that it cannot be a standalone challenge. That is so because the applicant's plea is not only about adult citizens not being coerced to be members of political parties. It is about not being so coerced so that they may exercise the Section 19.3b right. And they can exercise that right in this fashion only if it is indeed guaranteed by Section 19.3b. Thus, on its own, the freedom of association challenge begs the question. If that be so, is the right to freedom of association of any relevance to what this court has to determine? Yes, it is. If the content of Section 19.3b entails that an adult citizen desirous of standing for and holding political office may not be able to do so without forming or joining a political party, that pits Section 19.3b against Section 18. That then calls for a harmonious reading of Sections 18 and 19.3b, and that requires us to have a clear view of the content of the right to freedom of association under Section 18. In its traditional sense, the right to freedom of association is associated more with the positive than the negative element. The positive element is about the right of an individual to be free to form an association with whomsoever she or he wishes for whatever purpose. This is supported by the generally accepted notion that we are stronger when we have the support of others. Umtu, ngumtu, ngabantu. One becomes a fulfilled human being because of others. On the other hand, the negative element of the right of freedom of association is about the freedom not to associate at all if that be the individual's choice. If it is an individual's fundamental right to be free to associate, it must equally be one's fundamental right to be free not to associate. Although for some there may be advantages in being a member of a political party, undeniably political party membership also comes with impediments that may be unacceptable to others. It may be too trammeling to those who are averse to control. It may be overly restrictive to the free-spirited. It may be censoring to those who are loath to be straitjacketed by predetermined party positions. In a sense, it just may at times detract from the element of self, the idea of a free self, one's idea of freedom. Thus, being coerced to form or join a political party is an issue that may fundamentally touch one's inner core, a matter that goes to one's conscience. In sum, insomuch as choosing to associate is an exercise of the right to freedom of association, choosing to dissociate from that which you earlier associated with is also an exercise of that right. And choosing not to associate at all, too, is an exercise of the right. A restraint on any of these choices is a negation of the right. Thus, if the state compels an individual to associate when she or he does not want to, that limits the right to freedom of association. That must mean that the reading of Section 19.3b contended for by the respondents results in a denial of the right to freedom of association. The potential infringement of the Section 18 right calls for a reading of Section 19.3b that is consonant with Section 18. That cannot be the end of the matter. There are many other provisions of the Constitution that bear relevance to this interpretative exercise. And as it is imperative that the Constitution be read as one composite whole, I must have regard to them. It will be recalled that the respondents relied on the founding value of our Constitution contained in Section 1D that says ours is a multi-party system of democratic government. I read this to say no more than that South Africa must never be a one-party state. It says nothing about exclusive party proportional representation. The Electoral Commission also placed reliance on Sections 46(1)A and 105(1)A of the Constitution. These sections require that the electoral system be prescribed by national legislation. The Electoral Commission argued that if Parliament could not even prescribe an exclusive party proportional representation system, it would be left with very little under the power conferred on it by these sections. Surely, Sections 46(1)A and 105(1)A are not by any means giving Parliament carte blanche. The electoral system it prescribes must be constitutionally compliant. And the question is whether what Parliament has prescribed is constitutionally compliant. In varying degrees, the other provisions invoked by the respondents have some measure of support for the respondents, but none comes anywhere near indicating sufficiently that the Constitution requires an exclusive party proportional representation system. A constitutional provision that provides the strongest support for the respondent's interpretation is Section 1572A of the Constitution. It requires Parliament to enact legislation that prescribes a system of proportional representation exclusively based on party lists for election to a municipal council. Auta argued that Section 1572A does not create an internal contradiction. Rather, it imposes a requirement that entails a discrete and narrow limitation on the rights protected by Sections 18 and 19. Auta then made the point that this is not an isolated occurrence in the Constitution, as there are other such examples of intra-constitutional curbs on the full effect of certain provisions of the Constitution. I agree. And I also factor the crucial background of what took place in the negotiations for the attainment of our democracy. In that regard, there were issues that uniquely affected municipalities. As a result, negotiations in respect of municipalities were conducted separately from the rest of the negotiation process. That much finds support in this court's jurisprudence. It becomes plain then that the framers of the Constitution may have seen a need to introduce in the Constitution a discrete internal limit applicable only to the system of election of members of municipal councils. Viewed with this background in mind, Section 1572A does not contradict Section 19.3b. Section 19, which is the primary source of people's political rights, continues to be the fundamental norm, not Section 1572A, which is tailor-made for municipal elections. The normative force of Section 19 thus continues to apply in every instance where the Constitution has not specified a system of representation different to what Section 19 requires. Therefore, in the election of members of the National Assembly and provincial legislatures, the normative system the Bill of Rights itself creates is that Section 19 must apply. It must not be derailed or diverted by provisions specially created for municipalities under Section 1572A because of their unique setting. In addition, the interim constitution specifically provided for an exclusive party proportional representation system. The final constitution, for which we must read the Constitution, expressly stated that the exclusive party proportional representation system created by the interim constitution would apply with some amendments only to the first elections under the Constitution. The first elections under the Constitution were, of course, the second elections in our constitutional democracy. Here is what is crucial. Under the interim constitution and the Constitution, an exclusive party proportional representation system was already in place. It worked perfectly for the first two democratic elections. Why then would the Constitution have seen the need to dismantle this fully functional edifice if exclusive party proportional representation is what the Constitution requires? Surely then, Section 1572A cannot be enough to stand in the way of Section 19.3b being given its full effect. Given the importance of political rights within the South African context and the far-reaching implications that these rights have on the right to human dignity, these rights must be interpreted generously rather than restrictively. This leads to the conclusion that insofar as it makes it impossible for candidates to stand for political office without being members of political parties, the Electoral Act limits the Section 19.3b right. The question is whether the limitation is reasonable and justifiable as envisaged in Section 36(1) of the Constitution. None of the parties' affidavits dealt with this question. Although the absence of evidence on justification does not exempt this court from the obligation to conduct the justification analysis, I can conceive of no reason to hold that the limitation is justified. It is thus declared that insofar as it makes it impossible for candidates to stand for political office without being members of political parties, the Electoral Act is unconstitutional. The appeal must succeed. In accordance with the principle of objective invalidity, a declaration of invalidity that is not coupled with a limit to its retrospective effect would invalidate all elections that followed the first election under the Constitution. For that not to happen, the declaration of invalidity must take effect from the date of this judgment. and it is fitting to suspend the declaration of invalidity to afford Parliament an opportunity to correct the defect. And a reasonable period of suspension is 24 months. A second judgment penned by Jafta J and concurred in by Cameron J, Gampepe J, Matopo AJ, Mhlantla J, Theron J, Victor AJ, and me, agrees with the outcome and reasoning in my judgment. The second judgment highlights two principles which guide the interpretation of Section 19 of the Constitution. The first principle is that Section 19 must be read in its historical context, in which Africans were denied the right to vote and the right to be voted into public office. The other principle is that the language employed in Section 19 must be accorded generous and purposive meaning to give every citizen the fullest protection afforded by the section. The second judgment holds that Section 19.3 draws a distinction between citizens by conferring rights upon a specific class of citizens. The bearers of rights enshrined in this section are adult persons who are citizens. The second judgment reasons that to safeguard the free exercise of the right, the Constitution demands that the actual voting must be conducted in secret. This is a singular condition that Section 19.3 imposes for the exercise of the right to vote. The condition reveals the interrelatedness between the right to vote and the right to free, fair, and regular elections, which is guaranteed by Section 19.2. The second judgment holds that Section 19.3b must be construed in the same way that Section 19.3a is read and understood. It holds that it cannot be gainsaid that the right to vote, which is conferred in similar terms, is exercised by voters as individuals without the need to add words like as individuals. The second judgment holds that requiring citizens to exercise the right to contest elections and hold office only through political parties subverts Section 19.3b because the section confers the right on adult South Africans and not political parties. The second judgment concludes that the deficiency in the Electoral Act, to the extent that it fails to enable adult South Africans to stand for public office as individuals, is inconsistent with the Constitution. A dissenting judgment penned by Froneman J. agrees that leave to appeal must be granted, but disagrees with the reasoning and outcome of the first and second judgments on the merits of the appeal. The third judgment disagrees with the interpretation of Section 19.3b in the first and second judgments for not having proper regard to the constitutionally required electoral framework within which the right to stand for and, if elected, to hold office must be exercised. According to the third judgment, it was not shown that the Constitution prescribes something other than political parties in its fundamental multi-party system of democratic government. The right under Section 19.3b does not have an uncontested pre-given meaning that can be determined without having regard to the constitutional context. It needs to be determined not according to the notional ability or preferences of individual adult citizens to stand for and hold political office in any general everyday sense, but according to the actual content of the right within the constitutional democracy envisaged in the Constitution. The third judgment also disagrees with the reasoning that because there may be no obstacle in the Constitution to independent candidates, we should therefore interpret Section 19.3b as securing such a right. This, according to the third judgment, would be an illogical leap that cannot be sustained because it conflates electoral preferences with constitutional rights. The entrenchment of proportional representation and its achievement through the vehicle of political parties flows from prioritizing equality in political voice. That is, every vote counts equally over the accountability that might be better secured through a constituency-based system or a mixed system. In the result, the following order is made. 1, leave to appeal is granted. 2, the appeal is upheld. 3, the order of the High Court of South Africa, Western Cape Division, Cape Town, is set aside. 4, it is declared that the Electoral Act 73 of 1998 is unconstitutional to the extent that it requires that adult citizens may be elected to the National Assembly and provincial legislatures only through their membership of political parties. 5, the declaration of unconstitutionality is prospective with effect from the date of this order, but its operation is suspended for 24 months to afford Parliament an opportunity to remedy the defect giving rise to the unconstitutionality. 6, the Minister of Home Affairs must pay the applicant's costs in the High Court and this court, such costs to include the costs of 2 counsel. I hand down the judgment. Please note that as a precautionary measures, unlike what the court normally does, physical copies of the judgment and media summary will not be handed out here in open court. The judgment and media summary may be accessed online and will be emailed to the parties shortly. Court adjourned.